Hi, welcome to the Bible Standard, where you are guaranteed in-depth Bible study and analysis. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and drop a comment in the comments area to have your say, and we'll do our best to reply.
Hello, this is David Pearce in another of our series about creation and the wonder of creation. And this particular talks about flight, how birds manage to fly. So I'm sure we've all thought sometimes it would be wonderful if we ourselves could fly, if we could just jump off the ground like these birds do and skip into the air and soar high up in the sky. Here's a picture of a migrating goose. You can just see its head in the middle of the foreground, and it's looking down on the world as it flies over the sea and the ocean, the rivers and the land. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to do that? Some of these birds can fly at very high speed. Eagles, for example, can dive at 200 miles an hour. And hummingbirds can both hover on the spot and even fly backwards. There's one of these beautiful creatures. A swallow, an English swallow, weighs only 20 grams. And yet it will fly all the way from England to Africa and come back the next year to exactly the same nest it left the year before. Isn't that amazing? So, how do birds fly? How is it done? Well, to think of the requirements for flight, there are two things we need. We need to have lift, an upward force to get us up off the ground into the air, and we need what's called thrust, a lateral or sideways force to make us move in a particular direction. So here's my little aeroplane. It has both lift to get off the ground, and it has thrust to take it sideways. That's the same for birds. How do you get a lift? What creates lift? Well, the fact of physics is any curved surface, when moving air flows over it, creates lift, an upward force. Here's a little fan, here's a cross-section through a wing, and you can see as the air flows over the wing, it produces an upward force underneath, which we call lift. Now, to get this horizontal force or thrust, what we have to do is just push a lot of air in one direction so that it will produce a force in the opposite direction. If we want to go to the left, we have to move a lot of air to the right. Here's my little man sitting on a smooth sheet of ice, and he's got a little fan in his hand. And if he weighs 60 kilograms, say, and he pushes air away from himself, weighing 70 kilograms, there will be a force to the left. He will start to move. You might say, surely air doesn't weigh anything. But the fact is, yes, it does. And 1 cubic meter of air weighs actually about 1 kilogram. So it's quite possible to move like this. So here's a little man moving air to the right, and he's disappearing off the screen to the left because of thrust, a sideways force. Now, in the case of aeroplanes, the fixed wing with its curved surface provides the lift, and the propeller, or a jet engine, provides the sideways force, throwing a lot of air backwards to produce thrust. Here's my little aeroplane. As you can see, it's got a propeller to produce the thrust. It's got a curved wing surface to produce the lift. But birds have a flexible wing that does both things at the same time, both lift and thrust. So here's a picture of a bird in flight. And if you start off from the right-hand side where those red dots are, you can see it moves its wings forwards, up and then downwards, and throws the air behind it as it goes forwards. Finally, it recovers and returns to its original position. As it goes forward, it rotates and thrusts the air backwards and downwards, and then it comes back to state number one, the upright position. Here's an actual photograph of, I think it's a crow actually, in flight. And somehow they kept the camera moving along with the crow so you can see the action of the wings and how it's thrusting the air downwards and backwards as it flies. The fact is, these creatures called birds have very fine control over that surface, that curved surface. There are 48 separate muscles which precisely control the angles of that curved surface, so it can adjust what happens as the air flows over the wing. And you know when you land in an aeroplane, if you've been going on holiday, and the plane comes into land, you'll notice that the pilot lifts up the ends of the wings, a little flap comes up, which spills the air to reduce the lift as it comes into land. It's the same with birds. They have a separate false wing right at the end of the main wing, which provides a slot to spill the air. And there's a stalk in migration. And you can see the false wings lifted up as it wants to lose lift to land. Well, let's have a look at the wing of a bird in more detail. Birds' wings, in fact, are a miracle of design. That curved surface which we need is made up of overlapping feathers. And these feathers are locked into the bone arm, the bones of the arm, and when the arm bones move, the feathers all move with them. So here's a falcon, okay? Falcon wing. Actually, if you turn it upside down, this is what it looks like. You can see the bones in the front part of the wing there, which correspond to our arm and arm bones, and right at the very end, the wrist, where it turns the corner. Those feathers on the end of the wing are called primaries, and the ones nearest to the body are called secondaries. Okay, that's the classical naming for them. So there's the wrist, there's the lower bone, there's the elbow, there's the upper bone, or humerus, as we call it. Now, every feather has a very light hollow stem, and there are branches that come out that somehow interlock to produce a continuous surface, which is airproof, so to speak, a vane. So here's a feather, and it has a stem, which is called the rachis. That's what we used to write with years ago before they had pens. But up above that, you've got this airtight vane, as it's called. And if you look very closely at that and magnify it, you find on each of those little stems going out from the rachis at an angle, there are both two different kinds of connectors. Some are called barbules and some are called barbules. Let's have a look at them in a bit more detail. Here's the top view of the feather, magnified, and there's the bottom view underneath the feather, also magnified. And somehow the barbules interlock with the barbules to give a continuous surface. Notice the ones that go upwards are completely different shape to the ones that go backwards or downwards. That each branch from the main stem of the feather has two completely separate arrangements, one for going upwards and one for going downwards, so that they interlock with each other to provide a continuous surface. And you know, of course, when you were a child, you could take a bird's feather and break it, and then you could smooth it together with your fingers, and it would produce a continuous surface once again. So there's the barbs, there's the barbules, there's the barbules. Okay. The fact is, one single feather may have 1 million sets of barbules and barbules. Okay, now how do we make these big wing surfaces move? Obviously, we have to have muscles, as all living creatures do. But in fact, in the bird, there are two sets of muscles for flight. The stronger one, as you might imagine, pulls the wing downwards to produce the thrust and the lift. That's the stronger one. There's also a weaker set, it doesn't need to be so strong, which simply rotates the wing at the end of the beat and helps it to return to its upright position. So a strong set and a weak set. And those massive downbeat muscles are attached to the breastbone of the bird. And in birds, their breastbone is much deeper than ours. It's like the keel of a ship. In fact, it's sometimes called the keel. In our case, our breastbone is quite shallow. It doesn't need to be anything other than that. But in the bird, we've got to attach a huge muscle to it to produce the power that's needed for flight. So here's a diagram. There's the breastbone at the bottom, which you see if you carve your chicken or turkey on Christmas Day. You see the blue muscle there, the heavy one. That's the downbeat muscle. And when that contracts, it pulls down the upper wing bone, which is hinged at the point where those red and the blue come together. That's the hinge. And as this one contracts, it pulls the upper wing bone down. Okay. Now, you've got to get it back up again afterwards. So for the next wing beat. So the lighter muscles, the upbeat muscles, are connected to the main wing bone by a very long tendon that goes up in the body of the bird through a hole, which is called the foramen, and then comes down on the top of the wing bone so that it can be pulled upwards when that muscle contracts. It's a bit like a rope and pulley. If you see here, that's the upbeat muscle, the red one, much weaker. And you see it goes up, and it goes through a little, there's the tendon, it goes up through a hole called the foramen, so that when it contracts, it pulls the tendon through the hole and lifts the upper wing bone back upwards again. Here's my little man, look, pulling a weight over a pulley. It's a bit like that. The muscle is the man, the foramen is the hole or pulley, and the tendon goes down to, in this case, the wing bone, so that when the muscle contracts, the wing bone comes back up again. Okay, what about the bird's tail? All flying birds have a tail. The tail's made up of a ring of long feathers mounted on a stump, which can actually rotate in different directions. That's important because it acts as a rudder. So the bird can change direction, just like a ship has a rudder to change direction. And the tail can also be raised or lowered to bring about ascent if it's going upwards, or descent if it's coming downwards. There's a skeleton of a bird, 120 bones there. But look at the back end of it, the pygo style, as it's called. That's where the tail is. And that's where you have this fan of feathers that can be lifted up or down and turned sideways as well to change direction. Okay? That's the tail of the bird. Right, so we got the system worked out. Now, because flight involves an explosion of power, particularly at takeoff, to get off the ground, like your holiday aeroplane, when the pilot pushes his thrust lever forwards and the engine roars, so it is with birds. They have to have super efficient lungs. They have to have very rapid oxygenation of the blood that's going through those powerful muscles in order to provide the energy needed in a short time. So birds have a very efficient respiratory system, unlike our own, much more efficient, because in their case, fresh air passes right through the lungs into hollow sacs, like little tiny balloons inside the body of the bird, and then comes back again through the lungs backwards. So there are two opportunities for the oxygen to get into the bloodstream in the lungs. Here's my picture of a duck, actually. There's the lungs, and you can see these air sacs, as they're called, strange balloon-like structures. You don't normally see them when you're cooking your turkey for Christmas dinner and carving it, because they've disappeared by then, they've collapsed. But in the freshly killed bird, you can actually see that just like plastic balloons in different parts of the body of the fowl or the bird. So there's the air sacs, okay? So the air goes through the lungs into the air sacs and then comes back out of the air sacs through the lungs. It goes through twice. In our case, it goes into the lungs once, down, so far, and then comes out again. And so that's much less pumping of oxygen. Some of these air sacs actually go right into the bones of the bird, the hollow bones. It's amazing. And that brings us to bones, because obviously to create flight, the bird needs to be as light in weight as possible. Any aeroplane, extra weight means extra fuel, extra power needed. So to reduce the weight, birds have very light bones. Unlike ours, the outer wall of the bone is slimmed right down, so it's very thin. But it has cross-struts inside the bone to ensure it stays rigid, even though it's become very thin-walled. Here's a picture. There's the outer wall of the bone, much thinner than ours. But you can see in the diagram these cross-struts that go across inside the bone, like the girders in a new building, which give you the strength to hold the roof up. So there's the struts. And if we look at the close-up, you can see them there better in that picture, a micro picture of the bird's bone. Okay, so very lightweight bones. The other thing is, as you probably realize, all birds lay eggs. And this is because laying the egg puts the development of the embryo, the new chick, outside the body of the female. You can imagine how difficult it would be if chicken has 4 or 5 eggs inside her, and they all turn out into chicks, so they start to grow inside her body. She'll get heavier and heavier and heavier. She wouldn't be able to fly. So birds lay eggs so that the gestation takes place outside the body. That keeps the weight of the mother low so that it can still fly. Another point, it's interesting that birds excrete their nitrogen waste, not in the form of liquid like we do, urine, but in a crystalline form, uric acid. And you can see this picture here of a monument where the poor man's head is being draped with this uric acid, which is a very concentrated form of nitrogen and therefore weighs very little. It doesn't accumulate in the body in a sac, which gets heavier and heavier every hour. It gets out of the body in a quick, a very light form. And finally, we have streamlining. To reduce the drag on the bird as it flies through the air, we need to keep the resistance to the air to a minimum so it can flow easily. So we need a tapered shape for that. The older ones among you can remember Concorde, that brilliant aeroplane designed by the French and the English together, which had typically a very streamlined profile. And if you compare that with our swallow, the one that goes all the way to Africa, you can see the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of cross-section or longitudinal section, if you like, going through the bird from front to back. Now, an interesting point is the bird's wings need to be replaceable if feathers get broken or damaged. And in fact, it would be disastrous if the feathers were broken because the bird wouldn't be able to fly. So what happens is all birds have a new set of feathers every year. The old feathers drop out from the wing one by one. Only one by one because it leaves enough behind always to fly with. Let's explain that. It's what we call the molt order. Here's the wing of the bird again. And what happens, those numbers represent feathers which in sequence drop out and are replaced. So number one falls out from the primary and the secondary part of the wing simultaneously. Number one goes, it's replaced by a little stub of a new feather that begins to grow outwards quite quickly from there. After a while, number two drops out, number three, and so on, up the wing like that. And so eventually, the whole wing is replaced with fresh feathers, and the bird can fly happily again. And that happens to chickens in our back garden, the same as for the swallows that fly to Africa. One thing you might not know is, of course, the amazing colour of feathers and how that's created. It's very unusual. Feathers are coloured both for camouflage. Some birds, like pheasants, for example, the female pheasant merges into her background when she sits on the eggs, so her predators can't find her easily. Also, the bright colours of the feathers possibly attract the females to the males. Certainly, it's always the males who are brightly coloured in the case of birds. And then, of course, well, we can ourselves find beauty in the colouring of the feathers of a bird. Now, when we think of the peacock's tail, those colours that you see there are not painted on the surface of the feather. No. Those colours are built up from reflected light. The barbs on the tail of a peacock have multiple layers, microscopically thin, which reflect light at different wavelengths to create different colours. They still have barbs and barbules, as usual, but in fact they're much more flattened on the tail than they are on the wing, as you can see in this picture here. Okay, so here's a cross-section through one of those barbs. This is a micro photograph. And you can see there are layers of what's called keratin, same stuff your fingernails are made from. And those layers can reflect light at different frequencies and therefore giving you different colours. So the white light comes down from above and it reflects straight back as white light. But when it comes at an angle and goes through these keratin layers and bounces out again, it comes with a different colour. Now, each tail feather of the peacock is made up of many barbs. And this is the amazing thing. That eye pattern that you see somehow is spread across lots of different barbs. So if you look at it close up, there's the colours. Those are different barbs side by side coming off one single feather. There's a feather, there's a stem, look down the middle in that diagram. There's the barbs going off at right angles. And the eye pattern is formed by an individual barb going out from the stem, the rachis, which has different colours as you go along its length. And they're slightly different for the next barb, so that the eye gradually becomes formed as you go further away. Each barb has bands of different colours down its own length, precisely placed to produce the essential colour that overall creates a picture of an eye. There's another diagram. You can see if you follow a single barb from the centre upwards and at an angle, that single barb will be first of all blue, then purple, then bronze, and then back to purple again. And that's how each feather actually looks like one eye, because at the top of that feather, those barbs and barbules become coloured in a way to resemble an eye. I think that's amazing, absolutely amazing. Other birds have similar layers reflecting different colours. And, well, as a cockerel, a light Sussex cockerel, you can see on his neck feathers that you've got the same pattern of different shapes, one after the other, black and white. So the feather can produce flight. It can produce camouflage, if you want to sit on some eggs and not be seen. And it can attract a mate if you're trying to find a happy wife. So let's think about this now. We've discussed how flight comes about and what it's needed for a bird to fly. Let's think about the implications. How did flight begin? We've seen many remarkable structures which you have to have before the bird can take off from the ground and fly. They must all be present at the same time. Now, if birds descended from land-based animals like dinosaurs, how did they start to fly? Were the dinosaurs tree creatures and they jumped out of the tree and somehow learned to produce these amazing feathers that could provide a continuous surface to make a vein that will support air? Or were they ground-level creatures that somehow learned to spring off the ground and the feathers appeared and allowed them to spring higher and higher with succeeding generations? It doesn't really sound very obvious, does it? Nothing could happen until you've got a well-developed air-retaining surface to produce the downbeat, which will trap air in sufficient quantity, sufficient weight, to be able to move you forwards. Now, obviously, any new small projection that arose by mutation would immediately be eliminated by natural selection, say the experts, as being non-useful. And therefore, it's got to get rid of it. There's no point in having a projection on the wing of the dinosaur, on the arm of the dinosaur, if it's not going to help in any ordinary way. So how could feathers evolve? We see those amazingly complex barbules and barbicels which lock together to produce an airtight vein that can trap and move air, a curved but controllable surface. Obviously, mankind's managed to fly. Yes, we can fly. But it took thousands of years for men to develop technology like that. Only by concentrated brain power and handing on from one generation to another our discoveries by speech and by writing and by drawings can any progress be made towards flight. As you remember, of course, from history, there were many early failures when men tried to imitate birds and crashed into the ground. Here's the Wright brothers with their first genuine flight from off the ground. There's a modern airliner. But even a modern airliner is no match for the non-polluting and graceful flight of the bird. There's the swan straining to take off from the lake. There's a hummingbird as he sucks its nectar from the flower. There's the seagull flying huge distances across the ocean. How did that long tendon that comes up from the lighter muscle, in the interior muscle, going up to the foramen and going through the foramen and down onto the top side of the wing, how does all that develop? How do you get a tendon that finds its way through a convenient hole and then comes down again? It really doesn't sound very obvious, does it, how that could happen by chance, just by evolution, by random mutations. And what about the precise genetic control of the colour of those feathers? That's the awesome complexity of those reflective layers that reflect light at different frequencies to give different colours when you look at it. Somehow, that peacock, or like Sussex cockerel, must have a genetic program that fixes the precise distance along each individual barb where the number of layers or thickness of the layers must change to produce the precise colour that, as you go along and put it next to the next one and next to the next one, next to the next one, builds up into an eye. Who wrote the program? They don't write themselves. Somebody must have sat down to do it. What about those air sacs, those plastic bag air sacs, which give super respiration? How could they arise? And why did they only arise in birds and not in men or animals like us? So you could go on. I think it makes more sense, actually. It makes more sense to postulate a brilliant designer who was able to create perfect function and beauty at the same time. And we think that designer is, of course, not only all-powerful and all-wise, but he's the God of love that we read about in the Bible, a God who has promised his children a world even more wonderful than the one we live in today, a world where his name is going to be praised by all the nations on the earth. That's the kingdom of God, which Jesus preached and which Bible readers are waiting for. Here's a quotation. How about this? We started off by saying, wouldn't it be nice to fly? You see what Isaiah says in chapter 40. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That's the idea of the new body that God promises those who wait for his kingdom. So that's it, folks, and thanks for listening. And I hope that's given you something to think about.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching. And remember to come back soon.